afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It is my pleasure to welcome you all to this special gathering, the Lee Sing Kong Professorship in Early Childhood Education, organized by the Psychology and Child and Human Development Department of the National Institute of Education. This public lecture is one of the main events in the Lee Sing Kong Professorship in Early Childhood, established in honor of the late Professor Lee Sing Kong. The LSK Professorship in Early Childhood is conferred at the National Institute of Education, NTU, to outstanding professors in the domains of early childhood and early childhood education. First of all, we would like to thank Professor Lee Sing Kong for the opportunity for us to learn about the importance of the relational foundation of education, building strong futures through meaningful interactions in the early childhood. So allow me to invite Associate Professor Lim Kam Ming, the head of Psychology and Child and Human Development, to introduce our distinguished speaker, Professor Robert Pianta. Thank you.
Thank you for being here on this afternoon to attend the Professor Lee Sing Kong public lecture, right? And we are very, very honored and very, very glad to have Professor Robert Pianta with us all the way from the US to be with us for one whole week, right? And I was just telling the camera crew just now, when I talked to Bob, it felt like I'm talking to a friend I have known for many, many years, right? And it was just so natural, and he was just so generous in terms of his sharing and his, and telling us about his experience and expertise. Good. So let me formally introduce Professor Robert Pianta. He is the Baton Bicentennial Professor of Education, Professor of Psychology, as well as founding director of the Center for Advanced Study of Teaching and Learning at the University of Virginia, right? His research and policy interests focus on the intersection of education and human development. Professor Pianta has advanced theory and measurement focused on teacher-student relationship and their contribution to student learning and development. We all know Professor Pianta for his work on CLASS, right? On the classroom assessment scoring system that is widely used in Singapore, right? And he is well known for that in Singapore, right? The CLASS and associate intervention have helped teachers interact with students more effectively and are widely used in the US as well as in Singapore and in many, many other countries around the world, right? Professor Pianta received the 2025 Distinguished Contribution to Research in Education Award this year from the American Education Research Association, right? And was named a AERA Fellow, right, in 2011, right? In 2023, he was elected to the National Academy of Education. 2024, he received an honorary doctorate from the University of Stavanger and also received the Distinguished Alumni Award from the University of Minnesota in 2016. I better stop here, otherwise we will be here for the whole evening and night, and maybe tomorrow breakfast I will still be reading his list of awards and achievements, right? So. And we were talking at lunch just now. He also served as the dean at the University of Virginia School of Education, of Human Development for 15 years, from 2007 to 2022, right? And he remains a faculty at the university, right? So let's put our hands together for this moment and invite Professor Robert Pianta on stage.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming and spending your afternoon. It's very generous of you to be part of the session today. Thank you very much for the generous introduction, Lee. And it is my great honor to participate in this 75th anniversary celebration of the National Institute of Education, whose work I greatly admire and respect, as the recipient and honoree of the Lee Sing Kong Professorship of Early Childhood Education. Lee Sing Kong truly understood the connection that education and human development make to one another, both in his long history of work in agriculture and the connection of that with education through this. I think many ways a concept of nurturing and growth and attention to how an environment helps foster the development of organisms like humans and like plants. And so we're actually going to focus a bit on that in my talk today. So his legacy as an interdisciplinary scholar and leader at NIE is one of extraordinary impact, and I am really grateful for this opportunity. I want to also express my gratitude and deep respect for my hosts, our hosts at NIE, for all the efforts that you have made to make our visit rewarding, enjoyable, productive, interesting for my wife Ann and me. We have been treated with great graciousness and generosity, so thank you very much. Okay, let's get to the talk. We're going to talk about relationships between teachers and students and their connection to education and educational outcomes, and I'm going to walk through a series of research studies that we have done over time. So we'll talk a little bit about background theory on relationships, how important that theory is for systems of beginning to describe and observe interactions more formally. Then I'll present some evidence on the ways in which relationships and interactions matter for students and children's school outcomes, how they can be improved, and how the improvement of interactions in turn leads to the improvement of outcomes for students. So what I'm trying to do here is to bolt together, connect theory with description and measurement, with intervention, and with outcomes in a through line of relationships and interactions. And then begin to talk about how central they are to learning throughout the time span. And we will have some questions, time for questions at the end. So I hope to make for you the case that relationships are a fundamental resource for early development and learning, and are what we want to try to be able to answer at the end of this is why. Why are they, and how are they important? I think we're all familiar with the role that relationships play in brain development, and so much brain development happens early on for children, and it's not just this slide about the growth of the brain, but actually what's perhaps more important is the role that relationships play at various ages. Have I got the thing? Okay. So here it is at birth, and we see relationships and interactions contributing to the growth of brain cells at 5 years. But even more, or at least as important, is that those interactions between students and teachers and students and parents and peers contribute to the pruning of those brain cells in ways that they become efficient and operating circuits that hold memory and learning and skill within them. So relationships and interactions play a role in all of that development over time, the growth and the pruning of the brain, largely through a mechanism of contingent serve and return interactions. I, the adult, do something, I read the cue of the child, I respond contingently to the cue of that child in a timely and successful manner that deals with whatever that cue is intended to request. And then the child experiences a state of homeostasis or balance, and we move on to the next cue, which may happen almost right away or may happen a little bit down the line. And these relationships and interactions build up, in a sense, the capacity of the brain and for healthy development in all sorts of domains. We we enroll students in preschool often as a means of fostering development. And these educational programs that I know many of you are working in Singapore, in early education and care programs that we in the United States have opened up, are a way of kind of capitalizing on this information about how important interactions and relationships are for brain development. We see these as an asset for children. And these enrollments produce boosts in kids' skills. Not surprisingly, the evaluations that have been conducted really across time and across different countries. And the benefits of these programs enrollment are greatest in the first year and begin to taper, but they are largely tied to the direct experiences that children are having in classrooms. It's not like we just enroll kids in school, they do great, and then that lasts forever. There needs to be a constant nurturing and feeding of development over time through the kinds of experiences that kids are having in classrooms. And largely those experiences, particularly in the early years, that contribute to development are the product of interactions between teachers and students. It's where these contingencies that I talked about earlier are present. So the hypothesis that I am working on, largely for a very long time in my career, has been, can we describe interactions in a way that are meaningful and that create observable behaviors? Can those observable behaviors be measured so we can determine those that are most productive and less productive for students? And then can they be improved? So, we have lots of theory about the importance of relationships between adults. In this case, I'm including parents and caregivers and teachers. That in a sense, these relationships form what I think is like the infrastructure for learning, the basics of learning. They are fundamental to competence with peers, for self-regulation, executive function, self-control, for the ability to orient to a task and persist in a task, and even for things like immune system, brain development, and stress. In many ways, I think it's important to think about the competencies that young children develop and that emerge in young children, not just as a property of the child, that the child walks around with and carries with them, but really as a property of the relationship that that child has with their environment, and mostly the humans in their environment. And when that relationship is functional, we see these competencies at their maximum. And when that relationship is not functional, those competencies are recede. So these are really foundational contexts for learning. And our efforts have really been organized around trying to scientifically develop systems for observing and improving. And in our case, that system has been the classroom assessment scoring system, or the class that I'll be talking about quite a bit. Importantly, though, we should talk a little bit about the way our education system approaches relationships in teaching and learning. There's kind of some facts and some myths about that. I think I've made this case about the fact. I believe this is a fact. I think we can prove that it's a fact, that relationships are omnipresent in teaching and learning. They're always there, and they're mostly ignored. They're mostly ignored by educational programming and systems. They're oftentimes ignored by teacher preparation, and they're certainly ignored by educational policy. We pay no attention to relationships between teachers and students in education. So it's a resource for learning that our education systems treat unsystematically. We kind of leave this resource to the side. It's a myth, however, we often think of this, but it's a myth that relationships are not academic, that in fact that they are a soft skill. They're a nice thing to have. They're warm and fuzzy. That's the term we would use in the U.S. But they're not academic. They don't contribute to learning in an academic sense. And we also have this myth that relationships are kind of nuanced. They're complex. You have your relationships, I have my relationships. How can we measure them the same way? Because we have all these different interpretations of behavior, and that is also a myth. In fact, I believe, and we'll provide some evidence for this, that teacher-student relationships can be described, measured consistently, improved predictively, and when we do those things, we have benefits for students. So there's actually a causal chain that connects the description of relationships all the way to benefits for students in a way that I think disproves these myths and calls for us to pay greater and much more systematic attention to them in the lives of students. Okay, so our job is to kind of, I think, on my team, this is a result of a lot of work, not just my own by any stretch, is to move kind of this idea of relationships as some of a nice thing to have or a lucky thing to have if you've got a good teacher that year, to a guarantee that we can guarantee students have these kind of experiences year in and year out. And we've done that through a kind of theoretical framework called the Teaching Through Interactions Framework and the class measurement system. And this framework and the accompanying system really talks about three broad domains. Some of you are quite familiar with these, so I don't want to spend too much time on them. But the features of emotional support in interactions that teachers display with students, how teachers organize the classroom through their interactions, and instructional support. When we talk about instructional support, we are talking about the features of teachers' behavior that stimulate cognition. It's not standing and delivering a lesson well, it's how you stimulate cognition and language development through your interactions with students. Those domains are measured through ratings that we apply at these levels that we call dimensions. So you see the features of emotional support there that we're paying attention to, the kinds of behaviors within organizing a classroom that one would pay attention to, and then these features of instructional support that I just talked about. And that every one of those dimensions is described in great detail by a set of indicators that help us label and observe very specific behaviors. So for example, when emotional supports are the one at the top, we would pay attention to, does the teacher have warm relationships with the children, display positive affect and respect, and communicate well with kids. Whereas down the bottom here in the purple, we would look at the degree to which, in the middle one, this is quality of feedback, whether the teacher is providing feedback loops that look like those serve and return interactions that I talked about when we were talking about brain development. Does it encourage the students' responses and then expand on their performance? These are all observable and that they can be captured in classrooms. When we go into classrooms to apply that framework in standard observational work, what we're doing is taking that framework much more detailed. I've seen copies of the manual. It's this thick. It's not on 3 pages. And many of you know that you need to be trained to use this consistently. And we assign a value from 1 to 7, 1 being low and 7 being high on those dimensions that we talked about. And as I said, the ratings are based on specific behaviors that we use to infer those broader properties of relationships and interactions. So I'm observing specific behavior and I'm making an inference about whether those behaviors the teacher is displaying reflect a relationship in which sensitivity is a characteristic, a high-level characteristic, or sensitivity is not displayed, or feedback is a high-level characteristic or not displayed. There's inference involved. We don't count behaviors, but we infer. The common thread across all those dimensions and the observation itself and the behaviors is attention to the serve and return. Sometimes serve and return is around the student's emotional state. Sometimes the serve and return is around keeping the classroom well managed and organized. Sometimes a serve and return is around stimulating a conversation with a child about something that's of interest to that child. Okay? One of the things that's really important is this notion of being able to apply a system like this consistently. So we can all go and describe behaviors, but one of the things in moving, as I was talking about myths and facts, as we move away from myth and into fact, we want to be able to record these ratings and apply these ratings consistently so that if I go into a classroom and make an observation and make a set of ratings, it would be highly similar to what the ratings would be if someone else went into the classroom at the same time and did that. So we call that reliability, and that agreement helps us be systematic in the way that we approach relationships. Okay, so that again, we're trying to move the system from luck, you're a lucky student, to you're ensured that you're going to be in a classroom with a teacher who's effective. We've applied this system in tens of thousands of classrooms, including many classrooms here in Singapore. And what we find is that interactions vary greatly. The qualities of interactions vary greatly. Many children are in classrooms that the teacher's displaying very high levels of these properties, and too many children in where the classrooms are low. I'll show you in a moment a graph of this, but we find that the features of instruction are often characterized by very rote and focused, rigid behaviors that teachers display, rather than a little bit more stimulating. When we look at classrooms across time or across age, where we look at preschool and then we look again at classrooms in 5th grade or in 8th grade, we find that the personalization, the kind of features of interaction that the teacher's involved with the child personally, decrease over time, so that the social and emotional properties of the classroom environment become somewhat less well-resourced and evident. Not surprisingly, if you do surveys of kids, you find that kids will tell you as they go through the grades that I'm less interested as I move along in my school careers. This starts at about 4th grade. Okay, this is an example of a meta-analysis that colleague Tara Hopkins and I began. It does not include the Singapore data because this is data published through 2024, which means they were collected even well before that. Not even 2024, it's like 2022. So we're actually in the process of updating this. But part of the reason here is to say, interestingly, I know Singapore does this, I know the United States does this, we test children all the time. We have lots of data at the population level of children. We have no data that I know of in any country at the population level of classroom quality, of the features of interactions that take place of observed interactions between teachers. So you could not say what's the average quality or the distribution of quality of instruction in any country because we have no representative data in any country. So what we're trying to do is create a picture of what classrooms look like across the world. And essentially the pattern is, I'm trying to advance. Okay, the pattern is this, that features of emotional support, if the rating scale was like a 1 down here and a 7 up here, we see these are moderately supportive places to be. These are actually somewhat pleasant places to be for kids. This is mostly pre-K to 3rd grade classrooms, so we're not talking about high school here, where that decline starts happening. Classrooms are reasonably well organized, although there's more variation there than there are in other features. But this is one of the things that we really find kind of note. And this means that the average class rating, the average rating of instructional support, the way teachers promote concept development, provide quality of feedback to kids, and relevant content, engage them in relevant content through language, the average score is a 2. It's a little over a 2. And what that means is that these interactions are largely focused on the teacher trying to get an answer of yes or no or right or wrong from the child. Okay, it's a very discrete answer that the teacher can say, good job, now I can move on to the next kid. So there's very little depth to the kind of interaction that's taking place. We'll talk about this later when we talk about professional development, but this variation in this, even though it's limited, is very important to kids' performance. This is really where a lot of cognitive development happens, certainly as kids age. And so moving this from here, a 2, to up here even a 3 or a 4 by 1 point matters tremendously for kids' learning outcomes, and we'll show you some examples of that. Okay, so interactions matter. We'll talk about this now for the evidence that we have about the interactions between teachers and students and how they contribute to their learning. So we studied kids longitudinally. We observed these students. This is a study by my colleague Sarah Rim-Kaufman at UVA. We observed them interacting with their mothers during a cleanup task at 15 months. And some of those kids handled that cleanup task in a very even-tempered manner, very cooperative. And there was a whole group of those kids, I'm labeling them approach-oriented. They were very challenging in that task. They were kind of non-compliant, a little uncooperative, maybe a little negative. We all know, we've all been in those sort of circumstances, both of them. And then we then went forward from 15 months to look at these kids when they arrived in kindergarten. And those approach-oriented, the more challenging of those kids displayed all these kinds of behaviors, more requests, more talk, more off task. So they were a challenge to the teacher in a classroom. You can imagine that this type of approach would be one that teachers might find challenging. But depending upon the sensitive behavior of the teacher, those more challenging kids look very different in their actual observed behavior in the classroom. So this is what I want to show you next. So here we're going to look at observations of the children's off-task behavior in the kindergarten classroom under conditions where their teacher was rated low on sensitivity. This is a different scale than the one I just mentioned in class, versus high on sensitivity. So sensitivity is sort of really recognizing the child's cues for support and responding in a supportive and contingent manner. Now, this group is that more even-tempered, easy to get along with cooperative group at 15 months. And you can see they have off-task behavior, low levels no matter what. It's a little bit higher when the teacher is sensitive. This is the group that was a little more demanding and uncooperative at 15 months. Under circumstances in which their teacher displays low levels of sensitivity, insensitive behavior, not contingent, we find how high their observed off-task behavior is. These kids are off-task a lot in their kindergarten classroom. Look what happens here under conditions in which the teacher displays high levels of sensitivity. They are indistinguishable from these kids. Okay, remember I said earlier that I don't think kids carry around with them their competencies or their characteristics as if they are, their own properties, a label that we can put on them, but that they really, their competencies are the property of the interactions and behaviors that the adults and other elements of their environment are displaying. This is a great example of that. So these kids are indistinguishable. The kids we might be labeling as having behavior problems, which these approach-oriented kids demonstrate those problems when they're in the context of a lack of sensitivity. When they're in a context in which there's a high degree of sensitivity, no problems. Okay, and then we move fast forward a little bit for a few years, and we looked at the degree to which interactions as observed in the classroom, in this case this is an early form of the class, could be used as an indicator of quality of the classroom environment. So in the US, we talk lots about access to preschool. So we open up a lot of preschools for students. Access to childcare, so we make childcare available. And then we talk about the quality of those experiences that are happening in those environments that we open for them. So this is a way of thinking about quality. And we can think about quality in a couple different ways. The kinds of interactions that teachers are having with kids. This is the Early Childhood Environment Rating Scale, which is largely an observed measure of the kinds of materials that are in the classroom, and is the classroom clean, those kinds of things. And then there are structural features. Does the teacher have a degree? Do they serve lunch in the classroom? Things like this that you can kind of add up to an indicator. So here you're just seeing these checks are significant associations between that measure of quality and those outcomes, change in those outcomes across the preschool year. In this case, these are kids are 4 years old. So we see increases in all of these academic type outcomes when the child is exposed to higher levels of instructional supportive interactions. And we see increase in social competence, decrease in problem behavior when students are in classrooms that we would characterize as emotionally supportive. More recently, we've done studies in a large school system in Northern Virginia, 2,500 kids, very, very diverse group of kids. From preschool to third grade, so these are programs that the kids come in when they're 4 years old, and we followed them through third grade, and we see that features of emotional instructional support decline across time. So those preschool classrooms are on average higher on emotional support and instructional support, and that the quality of those interactions in those environments decrease over time as kids move through the grades. We find that those features of emotional instructional support do indeed predict student learning and social gains. We also find that class interactions and dosage of instruction interact with each other, so that it's not just the case. We have the argument in the U.S. that children in 4-year-old programs in kindergarten should be taught more. We should be teaching more literacy. We should be teaching more vocabulary. And so the idea would be, well, okay, is it the case that we just need to teach more, or do we need to pay attention to how we are teaching, okay? And the class assesses how we are teaching. And what we see here is that it's fine to teach more, but it's even better to teach more in a way that the teacher is displaying high-quality interactions using the class. So more is better only when the interaction quality is high. And then we find that these benefits of interactions in the earlier grades can have lasting effects through first grade. And in fact, when we start seeing kids who have a high-quality interactional experience with their teacher 1 year, and then they go to the next year and have a high-quality interaction experience with their teacher, and then they go to the next year and have that kind of quality. It doesn't happen very often, but when it does happen, those have even added benefits on top of the benefits that any single year may provide. Okay. And interactions are also uniquely important for children who have difficulty adjusting to classroom environments, like those kids that I talked about a little bit earlier from the cleanup task, the more approach-oriented, difficult kids. Okay, here we're looking at first grade. So in this case, these are 6-year-olds in the U.S., and we're looking at the ways, we're looking at a test of their literacy skills that was given the beginning of the year and the end of the year. So these are gains, a way of looking at gains, under conditions under which the first grade teacher was rated using the class, and they showed low levels of instructional support, middle, and high. It's just dividing and saying the bottom third, middle third, top third. For kids who come from families with a high level of education, these are moms, largely moms with a college education degree or above, and these would be a lower level of education just below that, not yet a college degree, high school degree. Okay, these are the gains, the average gains for kids from that high education group. And you notice that basically they sort of gain the same amount no matter what the level of instructional support that the teacher's demonstrating. Okay, kids are doing well. They're probably being taught to read mostly at home. But for the kids who are coming from those lower education homes, we see first off here that if you land in a classroom in which a teacher displays low levels of instructional support and you're a child from a low education family background, you are gaining way less than the peers who were lucky enough to land in a classroom under which the teacher was displaying high levels of instructional support. So those kids who come in as vulnerable kids, perhaps, kids who we're trying to accelerate their learning, demonstrate accelerated learning under conditions of high instructional support. Again, okay, the literacy skills are not something that the kid is carrying around with them. They're skills that the kids display on the basis of the kind of environments, and display and learn on the basis of the kind of environments they're in. Okay, same sort of setup here, but here we're going to look at emotionally supportive classrooms. So is emotional support, we're not talking about instruction now, is emotional support important for those literacy tests that we just looked at? And we're going to look at this for kids who, this is first grade, so these are kids whose kindergarten teachers at the end of the year said, these kids don't have any behavior problems, they're very well adjusted in my classroom. In contrast to kids who the kindergarten teacher said, these kids display multiple kinds of behavior problems in my classroom. Okay, these are kids that, again, we would kind of worry about. All right, under conditions of, for the kids who had no problems in kindergarten, they're learning a lot in literacy no matter what the kind of emotional support is that the teacher's displaying in first grade. But for the kids who displayed some sort of problem behavior in kindergarten, in the next year that they go into first grade, it really depends whether you land in a classroom where the teacher displays low levels of emotional support or the teacher displays high levels. Under those high levels, again, these kids who we worried about as having problem behavior are learning just as much literacy as the kids who had no problems the year before. Okay, so this is a way of really trying to make the case that interactions matter. Okay, and these are all large scale studies with lots of kids in them. And these findings have been replicated in really worldwide. In fact, recent studies, two things important here. The Ecuador study is a study in which the students were randomly assigned to their teacher year in and year out, so that you really are able to say there's a causal effect here between the interactions the teacher's displaying and the gains that the students are displaying. And so this is a very important study. And then we're also seeing similar results from a whole group of studies, China, Turkey, Israel, as well, and we will, I suspect, have some findings from Singapore up here when we see those data emerge. Finally, on this, teacher and child stress are important factors that a lot of people are paying attention to. So most children, particularly young children, experience some level of increases in stress hormone over the course of the day. It's stressful for little kids to be in a child care, particularly a child care center or a preschool classroom all day. And cortisol, which is a stress hormone, goes up over the course of the day. Okay? Interestingly, when they are in a classroom where the teacher displays high levels of sensitivity, you don't see that effect. In fact, the kids' levels are low or decreasing over the course of the day. But what's really important here are a couple things. First off, higher teacher stress, because remember we measure cortisol with teachers too, leads to lower quality of interactions with kids. And for kids that display problem behaviors, those kids themselves are showing high levels of stress, and their teachers are showing high levels of stress. So you got both of those things on the stress responsive interactions combining with each other. This is bad. So we took teachers who rated all the kids in their classroom on the kids' disruptive behavior, and we said to the teachers, who is the child who's most disruptive to you, that you worry about the most, that is most stressful to you? And then we put those teachers and students together in an intervention that we call banking time. And that intervention is basically an effort to get the teacher to not control the kid's behavior and to just observe the behavior of the child and comment on it in a way that is accurate and supportive. What we're trying to do is train the teacher's observation skills and sensitivity to the kid's cues. Okay, that intervention does a great job at training those skills. And so when we increase teachers' sensitivity by attending to the children's cues, these are disruptive children, we see decreases in cortisol for both the teacher and the child, and we see increases in the child's engagement, affiliation, and cooperation. So you see what we're able to do here is by changing the interactions, the behavioral interactions between teachers and children, and teachers' skills in those interactions, we're lowering psychophysiological conditions that would normally lead to problems for both the kid and for the teacher, because this is a reason why teachers burn out and leave the profession. Okay, so I hope I've convinced you that interactions matter, and we can measure them. If you need more convincing, I'll talk to you afterwards. So this is just a way of summarizing those. What I want to do is get on to how do we support teachers to change their interactions with children. So we're gonna move rapidly through a series of studies here. So kind of buckle your seatbelts because I want to leave enough time for us to have some questions. Is that okay? Okay. All right. Our goals for teachers are to become, number one, better observers of interactions. We're going to use the class as the lens for those observations, okay? We want teachers to be more intentional in their creation of learning opportunities, and in some sense, we believe that teachers' behavior change is a consequence of them learning about interactions and then developing the skills to observe interactions and observe children's cues and respond to them. We're looking at three kinds of interventions that we've developed. A course that is a college course, in-person course for teachers being trained, also an online version of that course, coaching, and a video library. And here's the conclusion. Okay, in almost any form of focused support intervention, that focuses on teachers' knowledge of interactions and their ability to observe their behavior or another teacher's behavior, their quality of their interactions improved. These are all done in randomized control experimental studies. So this is an example of the video library, okay? It's a very short clip of 30 seconds of an example of teacher sensitivity, and this narration tells the reader exactly what's going on here moment to moment, because we want teachers to pay attention to the moment-to-moment cues of a kid and what her behavior, the effect her behavior is having on that child's attention or that child's expressions, that child's engagement in a moment-to-moment basis. So we walk teachers through that. This is an example of the coaching interface where instead of seeing somebody else's behavior, you would see, if you were this teacher, you would see your own behavior, okay? I would be being coached, that would be me. And my coach would ask me some questions about my interactions. In this case, we're focusing on sensitivity, and I would respond to those questions down here. In our coaching, and our evaluation of coaching, we find that this would be the control group. So some teachers got coached and some teachers didn't. You see this kind of flat line from September. This is the school year to June. So their sensitivity did not change. The coaching teacher, the teachers who were coached, had changed by roughly almost a point. This is also the case. This difference is also the case if it wasn't sensitivity, but it were features of instructional support. Remember that graph I showed you that had that blue hump down on the left side, and I said we wanted to move it about a point? We can move it about a point. And we can do that through coaching. Classrooms in which children are predominantly from high poverty families benefit even more when their teachers have been coached. So we see here, unfortunately, with no support, when teachers are provided with no support, that actually is a significant decline in their sensitivity over the course of the year. But when we provide them with some support, we can see even a greater effect there. We did another study, this time with coaches from the local community, where we went in and just trained coaches in the local communities around, in 10 different communities around the country. And again, this is very focused on instructional support because we wanted to prove that we could move that blue hump, to the right side in a way that people were worried about whether they could change. Well, they changed by roughly a point on each one of the dimensions of instructional support when they received coaching. This is important because we did this into that study I just showed you. We did with 15 coaches that we trained. We just went into places and hired them. These were not people who, we just hired people who were working in the early childhood program. So I could come to Singapore, talk to the director of early childhood and say, give me 3 people who would like to learn how to be coaches. We would train them. And what this shows is that by and large, except for one of these coaches, 14 out of the 15 coaches produced gains in teachers' interactions, in the quality of their interactions. And we see these effects so that thus in teachers who have my teaching partner coaches, the teachers changed in this way, these ways. I'm not going to read all these, okay? And students who have teachers who have been coached made greater gains in academic skills. We did this study in high school classrooms, actually. We've done this in early childhood. I just showed you from the studies I just showed you. We took the intervention, we just said, will this work in high school? It worked in high school. Kids' scores on the high stakes standards test went up by 10 percentile points if their teachers were coached. Kids show lower levels of problem behavior. So I think what I'm trying to make the case here is that we provide targeted support to teachers around their interactions change, and then the children's outcomes change, both social and academic. So then we said, okay, coaching is a highly complicated thing to try to do. Maybe we can just take these kinds of things, these resources, and bundle them in a college course that I might be able to teach in a teacher preparation program to see if that might help improve interactions there. Okay, so we're trying to connect this idea of knowing about interaction with describing effective interaction and observing effective and ineffective interaction. So that's what this course is really focused on. And the results, again, randomized trial. We randomized some students into the course. Some students got another course. The course improved the class interactions significantly, and that effect lasted even a year afterward. So here you see here, the green bar is the effect after the course. So I give the course, then I go and observe the students in the classrooms in which they're teaching. We see a good boost on their emotional support, displays of emotional support. Instructional support, here we are almost a point on instructional support, that blue hump that we're trying to move. And then a year later, we went back a year later, same teachers, no interventions in between. And those teachers who had that course were displaying higher quality interactions in the classroom a year later. They learned something in that course that stayed with them for a year. Then we ask ourselves a question, what about an online course? Okay, let's see if that works. Okay, so this is my colleague Bridget Hamry, who's really responsible for the course and for the online course. So what we want to do is provide teachers with knowledge about interactions, and so this is like a video library, but it comes through the course. We're just trying to teach teachers about dimensions and indicators and behaviors, get them used to using our language and lens of the class to connect that to interactions as they might observe them in these clips, okay, what it looks like in real classrooms. Then we run them through a lot of activities that are like, I'll say, you've learned a little bit about sensitivity, watch this teacher and hit the enter button when you see an example of sensitivity, and this activity will give the teacher feedback right away about whether that was an example or not, and take them to the example of sensitivity. So a real intense learning opportunity for teachers. Lo and behold, the online version of the course, we did this twice, creates, again, for emotional support, classroom organization, and instructional support, an effect size of almost 1 in some circumstances in a randomized trial. So again, we see providing teachers with focused input and opportunities to practice observation skills results in improved behavior for them in the classroom and improved behavior for kids and outcomes for kids. Okay, so I think, what I've hoped to do is provide this argument that, class provides kind of a language and a lens for relationships. We talked about the importance of relationships, but they're kind of fuzzy. It's a kind of fuzzy construct. It's hard to pin down. What do you mean? Well, the class provides us a way of saying, here's what I mean. Okay, this is what I would observe if I was in a classroom looking at teachers. Interestingly, these professional development supports can be bundled in different kind of delivery models. We can bundle them in coaching, we can face-to-face or online courses. So the question then becomes, and I'll try to run through this quickly so we have plenty of time for questions. What I've described to you are a set of research studies. And we've done these in very diverse places, and I have a lot of confidence that they work, but we haven't rolled them out. They haven't been rolled out at a whole state, for example, or a whole country like Singapore. In the sense of, this is the professional development program that policy is going to support in this state. And we, the government, are going to invest in our teachers receiving this program. Okay, it's very different than doing a research study. And I'm going to show you 3 examples of that. One example actually I'm going to skip, let me go through this. I'm going to skip this one here. We use this in teacher preparation, and the students found it very useful. This is what happened when we went into the entire state of Louisiana. Louisiana in the U.S., a very poor state, very low-income state, very diverse state. This is what happened over 4 years in the state of Louisiana. For every single teacher from child care all the way to preschool, so serving infants, toddlers, preschoolers, if that teacher received public funds, then that classroom was observed using the class, and that teacher got an incentive, was basically a tax credit, to participate in an intervention that was kind of like the course that I showed you, online and both in person. Okay. Year 1 of this is dark blue is higher quality ratings. This is like a total class score. And white means these are quite low, below 4. Okay, year 1, okay, more light, mixture of light and blue. Year 2, starting to get darker, more blue. Year 3, darker yet. Year 4, almost uniformly higher quality. So what we saw was, in this description, the entire system of early care and education improving its quality of interactions that it's providing for kids in the programs that they're investing in. Okay? This was a really important set of work. And that improvement occurred whether it was a child care program, Head Start or early Head Start, or was a school-based preschool program. We saw the increase happen in the same kind of pattern across all of those. This is the entire city of Dallas. Dallas, Texas, again, mostly low-income kids in the school system, and we're following them from, in this case, it's kindergarten, first and second grade, so it's the primary grades. Their teachers are observed, and their students, the teachers are provided the same kind of intervention that the Louisiana teachers got. Knowledge about interactions and practicing watching video. And we looked at these kids over the kindergarten, first and second grade period as to whether they were in a classroom that we would rate as not quality. So we're looking at, kids basically below a 4 on that total class score. And this group, which is this group over here, were never in a classroom that wasn't not quality. They had not quality for kindergarten, first, and second grade. This is actually a lot of kids, okay? And these are kids who were in a higher quality classroom above a 4 on average, all of those grades. So if you had 3 years, kindergarten, first, second grade, of high-quality interactions in your classrooms, you had a 22-point gain difference, percentile point gain difference on the state reading tests at third grade. So essentially what you're looking at is here the kind of high-stakes tests that we give to students at third grade, the reading scores. The reading scores of these kids who had 3 years of high-quality experiences were 22 percentile points higher on average than these kids here who were in lower quality classrooms. Okay, what have we learned? We can observe and measure relationships at scale with some consistency, so this becomes a real language and lens. It's like, sometimes I like to say, engineers have languages and lenses for building bridges. They have a set of standards for how we build bridges. In education, we lack those standards. And this is an argument for building standards around interactions, around environments that kids are in. The importance of teachers seeing effective interactions is key. Interactions can improve predictably. These are all highly controlled studies, and we keep seeing this result, that teachers get better, they improve. But they're conditional. When we roll them out, like Louisiana, like Dallas, we need lots of support from the system to make these efforts a priority. Not get distracted by the other thing that comes along the pike, but to stay, on a multi-year process that has a focus on interactions. We see the kind of results that we do. Lots of implications for policies that we can talk about. I want to skip this so we get to the opportunity to have some classroom for some conversation here. I think what I've hoped to be able to do is create an argument for the relationships as the key, if not a key, but the key ingredient for lifelong learning that can actually have long-lasting benefits for the people that our education systems serve. Thank you very much.
Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. Just want to thank Professor Pianta again for the very illuminating lecture on the critical role of teacher-child interactions in shaping educational outcomes for children. I think your research has really influenced how we understand early childhood education and the mechanisms through which interactions translates into student success. So, we now have the privilege to listen directly from Professor Pianta on all the questions that you might have. So this is really your chance to delve deeper into the topics that were raised during the lecture, explore practical applications of the research, and also discussing emerging challenges in research, policy, and practice. So as we begin our Q&A session, I'll just ask that you can ask your questions directly, but please state your name and also your affiliation. Try to keep your questions short and concise so that other audience members can also ask their questions, and direct your questions to the microphone so that everyone can hear. Okay, so Prof. Pianta, are you ready? Okay, so any questions from the floor? We also have the Mentimeter, so feel free to scan the QR code to ask your questions if you prefer that approach.
Sure, I'm Hoi Shan from PCHD Psychology at NIE. I do attachment research, so maternal sensitivity or parental sensitivity is really my thing. And it is known to be a dyadic construct, meaning that, how I am sensitive to one child might look very different from how I am sensitive to another child, pretending I have another child. I only have one daughter. So my question is, I'm really curious to know how the training might work, because it sounds like it's a blanket training on the general concept of sensitive responding, but how about different idiosyncrasies of dealing with difficult children, for example?
So I'm trying to train, our interventions are trying to train teachers to understand deeply what sensitivity is, okay, the common property of all sensitive behaviors, and to understand the many ways in which that can be displayed with different children or with the same child under different circumstances, okay? And so That's one of the values of the video library, for example. We see lots of examples of sensitivity. This is an example of sensitivity. Oh, this is also an example of sensitivity. And to be able to understand, I didn't know this was the case. We figured this out in some research I didn't talk about much here. But it really is the case that these effects that we're showing of the training is a consequence of the teacher being able to detect instances of effective interaction at a micro level. By that I mean moment to moment. Like stop the tape, advance it a second, you see it, okay? And that's where this happens. And what teachers need to be able to do, what parents need to be able to do, is see those seconds and then understand those seconds not as disconnected things that don't make sense that I react to in the moment, but as, oh, this is an example of sensitivity or not sensitivity, because this is what kids do when you don't display sensitivity, but I know how to correct this the next time around, okay? So it is a training that I'm trying to train teachers' capacity generally because a teacher's responsible for all these kids, but to do it on the basis of understanding what this looks like under very different circumstances. A research study, I'll just talk like 10 seconds, a research study that we are now proposing is to do these same observations, but put sensors on all the kids in the classroom to see if all the kids are responding psychophysiologically and like their heart rate changes, their stress changes in the same way or a different way. We're actually also going to put little headbands on them that give you an indication of whether there's kind of a light bulb on or not a light bulb on. Yeah, but it gets at your question a little bit. Yeah, great question.
Okay, thank you, Hoishan. We have one question on Mentimeter that is kind of similar, so I'll just ask that very quickly. Can you provide examples of teacher sensitivity that are helpful to children?
Well, the core of teacher sensitivity is I'm looking at the front row here, okay? And Kenneth is not paying attention. He's looking at his phone, okay? And so, what I'm doing is I'm monitoring all of these individuals' attention to me while I'm the teacher in the classroom. And in the moment that I notice Kenneth's attention going away from me, I would do something to respond to that, like perhaps to walk a little bit more closely to him to help provide a structure to bring his attention back. So it's the momentary response to a situation. So that's one example around attention. Another example might be when a child displays some level of discomfort or upset. Okay, where I would not, we see this in classrooms all the time. The teachers think, I don't want to reinforce that, so I won't go over and provide comfort to a child who's upset, and it's just the opposite, okay? What they need to do is learn is just the opposite, that as soon as you begin to see that child show some level of distress, you want to be a figure that child understands as a helper, as someone who provides comfort. So I would go over and if it was a small child, I might sit next to the child, put an arm around them, or I'd speak in a soothing tone. Those are some examples of sensitivity.
Thank you. Are there any other questions?
I'm going to follow up on a question just now that was about the context. Oh dear. What Hoishan asked, right? So for different people, they've got different sensitivities. And then you talked a lot about video cases. What was going on in my mind as I heard that was that there was a lot of talk about AI being used, and some private providers of early childhood are even wooing parents by saying that, come, we would give you AI tools, your kids will learn that. Now that's very scary. But as we're going through what you said, there's a lot of opportunities in there for the contextualization of the video cases, for the chatbots to customize it to every person's needs. There is some irony there, right? Because chatbots are not necessarily the most sensitive and not necessarily the most human that we have. So at this point in time in the development of generative AI, I think it gives us a lot of, perhaps it's kind of an illusion of the mimicry of the ability to pander to customization. But it isn't true. So I'd like to just ask, what are some risks and what are some opportunities that generative AI has when it comes to the professional development program that you talked about?
Sure.
Thank you.
I think are some of the advantages of AI to the professional development I just described. So the coaching that we're talking about, which is the most powerful intervention to improve teachers' practices, that coaching is very labor intensive. Like I have to train coaches. It takes time for the coach to look at the teacher's video. The teacher sends a video in. The video's there in the coach's inbox. The coach has to watch a 15-minute video and find the example. These are all time, and they add money to what coaching costs in terms of being able to deliver it. We've done a lot of studies, and people are doing this work now, to be able to take that 15-minute video that the teacher might send in of her lesson, run it through an AI where I can say, find the examples of sensitive behavior here. Find the examples. We're working on classroom management. Find the examples, the good examples and the negative examples of classroom management, and serve that up to the coach immediately. So the loop between the incoming video from the teacher about her practice and the feedback that the teacher can get becomes much tighter and much less costly and much more efficient. So the efficiency of coaching, which has oftentimes been, a critique of the coaching, we can have that argument if that's, I'm not sure that's the case, but it can be reduced greatly. That's great, okay? It becomes more efficient. I think the risks I see of AI, so like, for example, there's this question of like, will AI produce robots that will stimulate kids' language development, okay? That take the place of the teacher in a particular way. Those robots exist. Kids can learn vocabulary from those robots. So the question is, can they learn conversations from those robots? Can the robot tailor those conversations to their understanding of that individual kid? I believe that's not going to be the case. And I think one of the things we have to be careful of with AI is that a relationship and a set of interactions has many, many, many layers of depth to it. When I think of the relationships that you're in with people that are close to you, that you feel dependent on, or they're dependent on you. There's all sorts of cues that are being transmitted that are not verbal, okay? And they travel oftentimes in many different channels, okay? And I believe it's the case that AI is going to pick up on maybe one of those channels, like words, or another one of those channels, like physical proximity, and miss all the other information that's available. And it'll make errors. I can tell you it'll make errors all the time. An example of this is that in Washington, D.C., they instituted an observation program with teachers around their interactions, instructional interactions with kids. It was called Impact. Every teacher got observed. And the way that observation worked was it counted the behaviors that teachers displayed. There's a list of desirable, effective teacher behaviors. We'd probably look at that list and say, these are good behaviors for teachers to display. Okay, let's go in and count them. Well, when you count them, you're missing the meaning of those behaviors for kids. So one of the behaviors was open-ended questions. We know that asking open-ended questions is a pretty good thing for teachers when they're teaching, but what ended up happening was the observer would go in and it was deemed good quality if you asked 3 open-ended questions. What do you think happened? Anybody want to volunteer the answer? Every single teacher asked 3 open-ended questions, okay? Because what you were doing was you're capturing a superficial indicator without the contextualized meaning. So the class, for example, gets a criticism of the class. It's a fine criticism, is that it's a high inference system. You have to watch a lot and make an inference. People have to be trained. Those judgments are not always precise or accurate. And our bet, and I think I have presented some evidence for that, is that by trying to capture the context and the behaviors together and the meaning of those for the kids and for the teachers, we're trying to err on the side of capturing the meaningful parts of interactions rather than the superficial parts, and not make the superficial mistake. We make other mistakes, but there's trade-offs everywhere in this. So that's my response, at least in part, to the AI issues.
Sorry, I didn't introduce myself. Chu Hang, and Kenneth's good colleague to keep him.
Good, thank you for keeping Kenneth on task. Yeah.
Okay, so we'll switch a little bit from AI to the school leaders. So the question here that's really popular on Mentimeter is, what role, if any, does the school leaders play in the coaching process? What can school leaders do to help sustain the improvement in teacher-student interactions over time?
Super good question, okay? And we know this from a couple of different studies we've done, where we've gone in, and all the work that I've described comes from working with individual teachers in schools that have been recruited into studies, okay? Not every teacher in the school, but individual teachers. In several of those studies, the teacher has said to the principal, we should try this more broadly in our school. And so we've gone in as a follow-up to do work with all the teachers in a particular school. And what they say over and over and over again is, we can now talk to one another using the same language and the same lens about the thing that's most important to us, which is how we're interacting with kids in the classroom. Many of you know that teachers sit, we've observed some of these. Teachers have been engaged in lots of professional development, watching videos in professional learning communities and teaching teams. And the 4 teachers that are part of a teaching team may watch a 20-minute video, and they are all seeing different things in that video. And that becomes oftentimes a very inefficient use of time, and then they spend their time arguing about whether that thing is a good thing or a bad thing, and that can be a useful construct, but when that's the only time that teachers are working collectively to observe each other's practice, it becomes idiosyncratic in terms of whether it works or doesn't. And what we're trying to do, if I'm a school principal, I want every single teacher in my school to be the best teacher that they can be, not just the one that got picked over here, or the ones that are in this great functioning professional learning community. So I want a common language and a common lens that we're going to, it might not be the only one, right? But there needs to be something that provides coherence across the instructional and classroom management and support approach that's being used in a school. And so that's why I think principals play a huge role in establishing those kind of broader frameworks for practice that are going to be the common knowledge, if you will, about, and same thing in teacher preparation. The example I was going to put up there about teacher preparation, we did this in UVA, which is to give, these poor students come in, they haven't taught. And what we do is we say, go visit these classrooms and come back and say what you see. And we give them no standard language or lens for the beginning of the most important part of their training, which is to establish kind of a base framework for how they're going to approach the learning that takes place thereafter.
Hi, Prof. Pianta. I'm Rebecca Chan from PCHD NIE. I have 2 questions. One is, does the teacher's ability to interact sensitively depend on their prior experiences of being engaged responsively? That's question 1. Question 2, on average, how long does coaching take for teachers to develop such sensitivity and meaningful interaction skills?
Okay.
Thank you.
I would love to be able to do the study that would collect attachment data and relationship data on teachers. and then look at that in relation to their practices with the kids in the classroom. So I have a basic belief, that having been responded to sensitively as a person outside of the classroom will contribute to my ability to respond sensitively inside the classroom. So I think it's a great hypothesis. I don't know of any studies that have looked at that. Again, another problem with our educational research system, we have lots of data on kids, no data on teachers. Okay, so, second question. Okay, the coaching model takes 8 sessions. Okay, so teachers would get coached once every 2 weeks. We coached them the whole year. Okay, so that's many more than 8 sessions most of them got. And we found that after 8 sessions, they got to where they were going to go and they stayed there for the rest of the year. So it's easier to change emotional support and classroom management. So we focused on those easy and harder to change instructional support. The interesting thing is, we have a paper on this, that when teachers are coached on instructional support, it takes longer. The change happens not like this, little bit at a time over the course of the year. The change happens like nothing, nothing, nothing. Oh, I get it. Now I know how to teach this way. And I think the kids have a big role in that, because as soon as teachers start teaching at using those high levels of instructional support, the kids reinforce that kind of teaching, because that's the kind of teaching they want. That was really the case in the high school study. Yeah.
Okay, we do have a couple of questions on Mentimeter that are around the idea of cultural differences. So I'm going to combine a few questions together, but I think the basic kind of question that on the audience members' mind is, given that the class was developed in the US, have you seen in your research cultural adaptations that needed to be made when the class is used in other social cultural contexts? And then specifically with the coaching, do you find that some of these coaching videos or coaching methodology would need to be changed to adapt to cultural differences?
Great question. So we have tried to, as much as possible, be sensitive to cultural norms and differences. That one of the ways that's kind of built into the class, like I said earlier, there are many different ways to display sensitivity, and some of those ways are going to shift according to culture. The question would be, does the manual appropriately capture those, or does the video appropriately capture those? What we've tried to do, certainly within the US, when the class was first developed, it's a very diverse population of people that we work with, linguistically and culturally. We spend a lot of time in California, one of our more diverse states, saying, are we capturing the appropriate elements of sensitivity or the appropriate elements of language modeling, particularly when you've got a lot of different languages. So that was a lot of work that was done in the initial part of the class, and to try to have videos that reflected those. I don't think we did the best job that we could have on that, and we still found, on the research side of things, we always looked at, when we had enough kids in classrooms, to be able to see, are we seeing differences in terms of associations with outcomes, or even in the reliability that observers couldn't code reliably in classrooms that were highly diverse? So we tried to subject this to a lot of empirical tests too. By and large, it seemed to have worked, okay? But we were not satisfied with that, and so many of you may know we did a whole refresh of the class into what's now called the class second edition, that is much more tailored to including cultural norms and cultural differences as a very specific criteria for making ratings while you're making those ratings. Third layer we do, so like if we were to get an invitation from, I just got one the other day, from someone from Turkey who's interested in applying the class in Turkey, in rural Turkey. And so we work carefully with them to do the translations, and the videos initially they'll get to work with a set of videos and try to learn a set of videos in English. But then before any study is done or any application is done, the videos and the coaching manuals and all that are done in the language that, and then the cultural examples that are there. Now, just to wrap this one up, but oftentimes I'm saying Turkey as if it's a monoculture, right? Or you could say Singapore as if Singapore was a monoculture. There are no monocultures, okay? So the evidence shows that what we're observing works pretty well and follows, sort of a set of expected results for all kids. So we're trying to essentially capture kind of a universal quality, I think, but to do it in a way that's appropriately aligned to a set of specific cultural norms and expectations. But you're never going to get that perfectly right because there are no monocultures.
Okay, thank you for that. Maybe just a quick follow-up. There are research studies out there looking at the class in different countries, and some of these research findings have showed that for things like emotional support, for example, you've got 4 different dimensions. In some cultures, maybe teacher sensitivity might come out as the strongest dimension for that domain, but in other cultures, it may be something like positive climate. So what are your thoughts about differences in these kinds of findings?
Yeah, it is the case that what runs through all of these dimensions is this common effort to connect the kind of serve and return qualities of behavior. And so those are in all of those dimensions. If you did a factor analysis, you would get all of that showing up in all those dimensions. And so I kind of worry less about, in this culture, positive climate showed up as being the most predictive of outcomes, and in this culture, sensitivity was, and pay more attention to is emotional, are the qualities of emotional support showing up in a way that's adding value to kids' learning. And so to try to organize my understanding of interactions and relationships as measured by the class at a kind of higher order level rather than a very specific level. Now, I think teachers, the change of teachers and the feedback to teachers needs to happen at a very specific level, but the interpretation of research findings, I try to be careful to not make some inference on one single study from one single culture that may be a particular finding may be significant and another finding not significant, but the actual value, the difference in the magnitude of those effects is very small. So we're just trying to pay attention to that. But it's a very good question. We just, we honestly just don't have enough data yet.
Okay, any more questions from the audience?
Hi, Professor Pianta.
Hi.
I'm Chien from NIE. So my question is, we have known that public resources and teachers' time are limited. So could you please comment on a proposal if the class is to be used as a nationwide measurement of teachers' performance and standard, but with minimal support of or participation in public professional development? What kind of improvement could we still expect? And what kind of problems or threat do you see in this approach?
It's a great question. It's a question that a lot of, that's the most important question in many ways. It's kind of saying, okay, you've got all this research, but if we're actually going to apply this research, what are the trade-offs that we're going to see? So we have some examples, like the Louisiana example I showed you. Okay, that was in a very limited resources circumstance, and very minimal professional development was provided. So how many of you are practicing teachers or directors or anything working in the field? Okay, I guess this is mostly tomorrow, or have been. Okay, well, if you go around every single teacher gets observed in classrooms all the time. Most of the time, the tools that are used to observe them are unsystematic and informal. And the teachers get feedback all the time, and that feedback is unsystematic or informal. So part of what we're saying is we spend a lot of money on these kind of activities already, okay? Our systems do. What we're not doing is using those resources that we're already spending in a way that is more formalized and more systematic and more likely to lead to some of the changes that I think I described here. I don't know that we have the absolute answer for you right now. We have examples, okay? And we're doing this work with a lot of states and cities and countries. And what we're hoping to do is learn from, honestly, is to learn from that and to become more and more efficient as we go. But I can tell you that these were studies done in the United States that this was like 10 years ago, that the average kindergarten to 12 compulsory schooling age, the average teacher of kids in compulsory grades, the cost of professional development for that teacher in that given year, if you added up all the costs, was $10,000. So there's a lot of money already in the system. We're not making, I think part of the argument I would make to leaders, we're not making wise choices, okay, about the use of some of those funds. That's not to, I'm not trying to dodge your question. But you can expect, if you were to roll this out, the most important thing is the training that's provided initially, and that people are trained so that, and you don't need every teacher to be trained in the class to be able to use the class. You need the key people that are providing observation and feedback to teachers, and then you need teachers to get a training that this is what the class is about. This is what interactions are about. Here's what it looks like on a video. And these are the kind of supports that we're going to provide for you over the course of the year. So it's a much lighter touch that teachers get. Yeah.
Okay, we have one question that's popular on Mentimeter. So what are some of the key structural factors that would support high quality interactions?
Okay, key structural factors that support. Well, it's not necessarily having a college degree. It's not necessarily how much money that your program is spending. It's not necessarily whether you have a lot of experience as a teacher. There are very, very few structural factors that have been found to be related to what we call process quality or interaction quality very often. So again, this is an argument we make for alignment of structural features like teachers' degrees, the kind of courses that teachers are taught in teacher training and preparation, to specific forms of quality and the outcomes that are associated and metrics that are associated with the quality. There's very, very little relationship that is systematically identified between structural features and quality. You do see when ratios or group sizes get kind of too big, you see teachers shift from, no surprise, they shift from a focus that's a little looser in terms of their management of kids, where kids have more autonomy. They shift to a much more controlling focus, and then you often see negativity go up for the kids.
So maybe just a follow-up. In Singapore, in our early childhood classrooms, our class sizes can be quite big, and the teacher-child ratio, while it's regulated, I think we're looking at, for our children who are 5 to 6 years old, about 25 children to a teacher. And so how do you think teachers in classrooms like this would be able to engage in the high quality interactions that you talk about?
So the risk, I think, under those circumstances, and I don't mean to say that this is a good or bad thing. I would say if somebody said to me, we're having, we're going to staff, we're going to open up programs for 5-year-olds, and we're going to have one teacher for 25 5-year-olds, I would be worrying about the teacher feeling as though the only thing they are going to be able to do is manage the classroom, so that they're going to see their role as managing kids' behavior. And that's probably going to be, that's real. And I would be trying to discern whether the curriculum is going to be the kind of curriculum that kids are going to find interesting and want to be actively engaged in. Because if it isn't, then the kids aren't going to be busy, and the kids are going to be wandering around and looking to the teacher. That's going to be a problem. So I'd be trying to put together all those things, and then I would be looking at providing teachers a set of supports that would enable them to implement an interesting curriculum, okay, in a way that provides them some opportunities during the course of the day to engage in small groups or or individually with kids, and to look at what they're doing with the kids through a more developmentally and interaction relationship framework, not just a management and instruction framework, because that's the risk. I think you could probably do it, but it would require that kind of approach, if you will. Unfortunately, too oftentimes, this happens in the U.S. too. We have somewhat smaller class sizes, but not dramatically smaller. Teachers are kind of thrust into that, but that kind of position, and they're saying, "Good luck. Here's 25 kids. Teach them this year." They're not given a curriculum. Oftentimes, our curricula are very unsystematic, and they're not given, or they're given a curriculum that's not particularly interesting. They're told that the kids are going to get tested at the end of the year on X, Y, or Z, so that's what's in their mind immediately, is trying to teach that test. So it's not a good setup. And I'm not inferring anything about Singapore on that. That's what I've observed. That's what I've observed in the U.S. Yeah.
Okay, time has caught up with us, so I think we have time for one final question. So I'm going to open it up to the floor before I look through our Mentimeter again. Any final questions? Yes.
Is
the portal available complementarily for teachers?
The
Are you
professional
talking about the
development?
My Teaching Partner portal? Or the online?
Oh, the online portal. Typically, that's the school division or the school that the teachers are working in would contract with the provider of the portal, as a company called Teachstone that actually provides those resources, and they would make those arrangements to make it available to teachers. There's very few, if I know of any, teachers that are subscribing individually. It's not that kind of a system. It's managed like most professional development through contracts with school systems.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Professor Pianta,
Okay,
for all your
thanks very
generous
much.
and thoughtful responses. I think your willingness to engage such a wide variety of questions has enriched our understanding considerably. To our audience, thank you for your excellent questions and active participation, both in person and in Mentimeter. I'm sorry we weren't able to answer all your questions. I hope this has been an enriching session for you. So I hope you can join me in thanking Professor Pianta once again for a very interesting lecture and discussion. Thank you. I enjoyed this.